Yay, Margaret!
For those of you who don't know me, some of my social circle overlaps with my mother's, but Margaret's eldest son, who had the privilege of living in Cambodia for not nearly as long as she has. Somebody thrust one of these evil devices into my hand. This is a message from Carol Mortensen, who can't be here tonight, but an old friend of mine's. Yeah, and now in Vietnam. She asked that this be read out this evening. Good evening, Margaret. While I can't be there to celebrate in person with you, I'm thinking of you and sending all our best wishes as you transition to your next adventure. When I first arrived in Phnom Penh, you were one of the very first persons whom I met. Bill Armstrong thought highly of you and your commitment to Cambodia and recommended I contact you as soon as possible. It wasn't the day I arrived, but very soon after. I have greatly enjoyed your friendship and your support. I remember when we babysat, that must be Subi. Subi. Yeah, not Scooby. Anyway. And when we flew to Hanoi together, and many other special moments we have shared. Take care, and I know we will see you with each other in the near future. Best, Carol and Chetra. And so I will now hand you over to Margaret Bywater.
That was a lovely introduction from Carol, all the way from Vietnam. So thank you to Gita, who facilitated that, and Scott for reading it. So tonight I'm going to talk about some of my experiences here, mostly in the 80s, because when we were working on this, Scott and I together, by the time we got to the end of the 80s, we thought, maybe I'll have spoken enough and you might want to ask questions. So then for the 90s and the 2000s, I'll have to work on that for another day. Beginning at the beginning, so we all know where Cambodia is on the map. But way back in the 90s, when I was given some money for the Hun Sen Library, I went to Bangkok and bought a number of things, including a globe. And generations of students put their fingers on Cambodia. And so Cambodia is no longer on that globe. And this was because in those days, Cambodia was so excluded from the outside world that students really did not know where their country was in relation to the rest of the world. They'd seen flat maps, but to see a globe and see where Cambodia was and where other countries around in Southeast Asia are situated, it was a real learning experience for them. I think if you went to a university or a high school now anywhere in Cambodia, most students would not have that problem. So that's where we start, knowing where Cambodia is. This is a slide taken in the Botanical Gardens in Canberra. And I had a visit from American Quakers. This is Dave Elder and this is Nancy Smith. Dave Elder was one of the senior people in American Friends Service Committee way back in the 80s, and he was one of the first people to come here in 1979, where after the liberation, or whatever your political view is, of Cambodia. And Nancy Smith was, I think, the second representative here. So they came to speak to Australian Quakers about the work here. So I actually did quite a bit of preparation for coming, and over a number of years. I didn't just drop in. I'd worked for projects in Vietnam during the war, where Quakers supported projects both in the north and the south, and in particular a project called the Gordon Barclay Fund, which established play therapy sessions in a number of the very many orphanages that were in Saigon and surrounding areas back during the war. And it was largely as a result of that, and as a result of my brother working with a medical team in Vung Tau, that I learned a lot about Vietnam. And later we adopted our youngest child, who was born in Saigon during the war. So I had a lot of influences that brought me to Cambodia. But of course, everyone knows, most people know about Angkor Wat. And I remember seeing a movie way back in the 60s, a children's movie called Neok, the story of a little elephant. And when I saw that movie, I thought, one day I will visit Cambodia. But this is actually a very sad picture. If you look closely, on the back of this cart is a severely wounded soldier. So, here we are, flying into Pochentong, to reference that some of you might recognise, on the 16th of July, 1986. Now, this photo was actually of Pochentong in 1960. So by the time I arrived, it hadn't really changed very much. There were lots of rice fields around, but during the war there'd been more buildings. But what is missing in that picture is the VIP lounge, but I never managed to arrive at the VIP lounge. So from arriving at Pochentong, in those days there was only one flight a week. And one flew from Bangkok to Saigon and sat around and waited for several hours, and then flew with Air Cambodia to arrive in Phnom Penh. And almost all of the passengers were coming to in and out because they were involved with various projects. There was only one or two UN agencies allowed to operate here at that time, and one was UNICEF, and they were allowed to operate in Cambodia because their constitution says that they are for all children. And they did really very, very important work in those early days, in immunisation and education and other programs. It's very vital work, laying the foundations. The other UN agency was UNHCR, but they were just a presence, a fairly quiet presence, so not terribly active. Now this view is taken from a balcony of the Monorom Hotel, which is no longer a hotel, but you might be able to recognise some of the landmarks there. So here, that's the railway station. This is the beginning or the end of the road to the airport. So a lot more trees there than there are now. There's a lot more other tall things, not trees. If you've ever heard people talking about Bangkok, that is the lake that is now lots of high-rise buildings and office buildings and roads and infrastructure. But I have fond memories of going on that lake on a Sunday in swan boats. So the boat was shaped like a swan and you had to pedal. But that was a great Sunday occupation. So that's Phnom Penh. And you might think it hasn't changed much, but I think it has changed a lot. So 1986 was not many years after people had returned to the city. And when they returned, there was very little infrastructure. Many buildings were in a poor state of repair. The roads were terrible. The first people who returned mostly found somewhere to live in the centre of the city because they were afraid. I know friends whose families had houses in Tuluswai Prey and other places, and I said, well, why didn't you go to your old house? Oh, no. You wanted to be safe and with other people in the centre of the city. I tried to figure out where that is, but it must have been somewhere near the Monorom Hotel. And I showed it because chosen it because it shows bicycles were the most popular means of transport. I don't think I remember seeing motorbikes. The East Bloc embassies, some had cars. The Russians certainly had cars. Oh, now. Thank you. One of my dear friends has just walked in. Whereas most of the pictures of adults, they look pretty tense, and I love this picture because this is when you come out. It was taken after coming out from Tuol Sleng prison, and there were the children, and they're all smiles. So at that stage, that was the future, not the past. And this is quite near the Monorom, and I think it was some kind of people would go there to exchange. I'm not sure it was a money exchange or what it was, but it was always very, very busy, and more bicycles. Chung Ike. This is Chung Ike before the big stupa was built. And it's a bit confronting. And when people came the first time in those years, you were given an opportunity to go to Chung Ike or Tuol Sleng. And I think it was because Cambodians wanted people to understand. If you come now, it's more something that tourists do. But the numbers of times I've been to either place, it's like going again for the first time and reminding you of the horror and the terror. and then the stories that I have heard over the years that also now off into the provinces. To go to the provinces, before anyone of the NGOs needed to go to provinces where their projects were being implemented, they had to get permission. You had to get permission from the Foreign Ministry and usually from the ministry that was administering the project. So, does anyone know where that is? Okay, this is the entrance to the Teachers' College, the university in Cambodia. And it looks very different now. And that's a damaged building. Later on, I'll show you what it looked like a few years later. One of the things that Quaker Service was doing was to provide equipment to enable school furniture to be built, desks and chairs and tables. And this is trying out a new piece of equipment. This is the American Friends Service Committee vehicle, which was the only vehicle they had, and it travelled up and down that road fairly often. And the bicycle. The bicycles were beautifully decorated, and they would have a crochet seat and a lovely little things dangling from them. Because a bicycle was such a special possession, you had to decorate it. And if you didn't have anything else, you had a bicycle. And if it looked good, well, you were happy. So this is a sawmill, or a saw that was brought in to saw up logs and make furniture, mostly desks, and to build schools, because there were very, very few schools. Now, coming back from Kampong Cham on this particular visit, when you went to Kampong Cham, there was no bridge that you could roar over. When you got to Prekadam, you had to go by ferry. So, coming back from Kampong Cham on one occasion, we got there and the ferry had broken down. So Nancy Smith, the representative of the American Quakers, said, well, she'd go and see if she could find a fishing boat to take us across to the other side. And it was July, and the fishermen, so she thought maybe she could persuade the fishermen to take our little contingent all the way to Phnom Penh, because the imperative was you left Kampong Cham at 12:30 and you had to be back in Phnom Penh before 6 o'clock. You had to be off the road. So the fishermen were happy to take us across the crossing. When we got to the other side, then we had to find a way to go to Phnom Penh. So with the help with Nancy, she's not in the, oh yes she is, and the gentleman from the Ministry of Education, they found a remorque that was willing to take all these strange looking foreign people. Well, only two strange foreign people. So I really love that photo, because it's when you look behind and see that we are parked right beside a fuel tanker. And this remorque was going to take us all the way, well, not all the way, it took us as far as kilometre 6, And there was zoning, so then we had to negotiate with another remorque and continue to Phnom Penh, just so long as we got back by 6 o'clock. But it was really fascinating to travel, instead of being up in a Land Cruiser, to be down at people's level. So we got lots of looks and people commenting and not waving. They didn't wave, but they were obviously very interested in this strange passengers. So along the way, this is the kind of thatch housing that people in the countryside lived, and very likely the women would have been the heads of households, because men were either lost in the war or were away fighting still. So later on I was involved with some women's projects to help because of the need for women to be able to plough their land, plant rice and mill the rice. So that was a very interesting project that I was involved in a number of years later. That's an aside. So this is on the same trip, and you can see there's a detour on the road, and every time I go up that road I used to remember that, where we had this very long detour because you couldn't go straight, and that's the Mekong beside us there. Now we're back in Phnom Penh, and there's a few shots of Wat Phnom. So very much similar, although it's been restored and renovated a few times, and there are lots more trees now. But it was on a Sunday. It was a very popular place to go. Bicycles, sambo. The Sunday was the only day people didn't work, so they would. As well as going to Tuol Sleng, people would be invited to go and view the former royal palace, because we didn't have a king then, or he wasn't in country. So these are pictures of the royal palace and the grounds in the 1980s. So nicely manicured gardens, and the buildings standing up against the tropical climate. We did have time to have fun. And this is a picnic at Udon. And it was for a farewell for two American physiotherapists. I think you call them physical therapists, but I'm used to the Australian term. And they worked with the National Rehabilitation Centre, working with landmine and war-injured people with arms and legs and other problems. So in order to go to this event, the people from the National, forget the name of it, sorry, from the centre that was working with the landmine victims, they had to get permission to go to Udon. American Quakers had to get permission, and it just happened that we went to the same place. And I remember that was the first time I ever tasted, you know, that lovely Khmer sweet with the steamed pumpkin with the custard there. So and we also had to dance, so that was fine. Now, I haven't said much about the English program, but it was really became the central program for Australian Quakers. And one day in 1984, I was in Australia at a conference of NGOs in Canberra, and a director of aid programs stopped me while we were walking between one meeting and another, and he said to me, do you think the Quakers would be interested in administering an English language program in Cambodia? And I said, well, I can't answer for the whole organisation, but I suggest you should ask. So this came about because in 84 or 85, there was a delegation from the Australian government, and a request was made by Hun Sen to Australian officials that help should be given to a number of fields, and one of them was English language. Hang on. Bill Hayden, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, with the help of senior people in the aid program, came up with a solution where, because Australia could not have bilateral programs, that's country-to-country programs, on a government level, then why couldn't the Australian government fund NGOs to do these kinds of things? And so that is indeed what happened. And a number of projects that still are ongoing in education, in health, and the Rice Research Program, those have their beginnings in the middle of the 80s because of the initiative of the Australian government. And it was providing aid that was not available in other ways. So I wonder who these people are. These are the first group of Cambodian students who would later come to Australia, but I first met them and they were studying in Hanoi. So that was quite a milestone. We went to see them in Hanoi. Now we're going to go back to Kompong Cham. So this would have been maybe a year, at least a year, after my original visit, and including subsequent visits to the Teachers' College in Kompong Cham. And you can see here the old building and the new one. And more sawmills. I hope they didn't chop down too many trees. That would have become quite an established little enterprise. So I also wanted to show you what it looked like in the countryside and the modes of transport that people used between villages. And I forgot to say that the road to Kompong Cham, there were villages along the way, but each village had a bamboo gate that would be across the road, be closed at night to protect the village. And there was a section of the highway, what is now the highway, where the drivers would put their foot down and go, because, I'm not sure it was true or not, but we were told this is where the Khmer Rouge crossed the road. So this was a constant reminder that we were in a war zone. some more transport. There was very active ferries going up and down the Mekong between down to all the provinces in the south, like Svay Rieng and Pre Veng. And ferries, because to get to the other side, there was only the bridge down that now goes to Kins Fai. The bridge that you all know, to Chui Chun Va. When I first came, it was like this, because it had been dynamited by the Khmer Rouge. And I actually felt great sympathy for that, because in Hobart, in 1975, we had a bridge disaster where an oil tanker came up the Derwent River and crashed into one of the pylons, and a whole section of the roadway fell into the river. And so I knew what it was like to be on one side of a river and not be able to get to where you worked or where you went to school. And one of the people who couldn't go to school that way was Scott Bywater. And this is nothing to do with Cambodia, but after the bridge disaster, a few days after, we were all ringing each other up, and everybody's children said to their mums, "But Mummy, you say bridges don't fall down." Very active life on the Mekong. And the rice industry, and Australia had quite an involvement with that through the Erie program. Now this is Royal University Phnom Penh. You wouldn't recognise that, would you? This is the central library. This is some outbuildings. They're not there anymore now. I think the mango tree is still there. I ran a workshop in 1987 for librarians from various libraries, mostly in the Ministry of Education. And you can see this was in one of the buildings on the main building of OUPP, the oldest building, which dates from the 60s. So in 1988, Quaker Service Australia was able to have a parting of the ways with the American Quakers, and we could control our own projects, implement our own projects. It was a friendly break, and this is a party that we held at the summit, at the Raffles, but it was then known as the Samaki, to celebrate this momentous occasion of our first overseas office. So two of the teachers and the others officials from various ministries. And of course we had to have Khmer music. So while we're talking about the Samaki, that was a wonderful place. That was where the centre of our social life. So that hotel was built in the 1920s, and it was pretty, it was a lovely solid old building. It still has great vibes for me. And it had a pool, and it had an entertainment centre. And despite the curfew, everybody either living in the Monarom or the Samaki, in the hotels around, we were allowed to socialise up to midnight. So we could move from one hotel to the other. And I've got a lovely story. One night, we were walking from the Samaki Hotel towards the Monarom, and you walk a crowd of people together. And as you got to the intersection with the Pochentong Road, where the Thai Bank is now, there would be guards in hammocks, and you would call out your name and where you were from. In other words, your country. And a little ahead of the group that I was in, there was this lovely Japanese man who was the director of the Japanese volunteer organisation. And he marched up and he called out, "Soviet!" And everybody just fell about laughing, because anything less like a large Soviet than a gentle Japanese man. There are lots of funny stories like that. And I remember later, in 88, when I was recruiting teachers for this program, and I got up a little advice sheet, and at the bottom of it I put, "Do you have a sense of humour, and can you ride a bicycle?" And that always brought some interesting responses when it came to interview. More children. So this is another little visit to one of the provinces. The children were always the ones who wanted to look at us and touch us and smile. So I went with Jennifer Nichols, who was by this time managing the Freedom from Hunger program, and they were developing irrigation programs in parts of Takao that were very dry. And we went to visit an area where there had been Khmer Rouge immigration, and all the irrigation infrastructure was very strange looking and very square concrete devices. And the Cambodians told us that the Khmer Rouge tried to make water go uphill without pumps. So Freedom from Hunger were trying to restore irrigation for a number of communities, making the best out of what had been probably a bit of a disaster, because you think of the labour of the ordinary Cambodians who would have carried the stones and dug and all those. You've also, I'm sure, seen those film clips. But to have a disaster at the end of it must have been very dispiriting. This is another little outing to Tonle Batte. So an ox cart in the main street and the temples at Tonle Batte. So I was there recently, and the temples haven't changed, but the surroundings, the roads are there, and the people still smile. Oh, I don't know who that is, but somebody tried to take a boat across the lake. I mentioned before about the English program, and we started with students at what is now the Royal University of Phnom Penh. And during our time it became University of Phnom Penh. It didn't become royal until after the 1993 elections. But this is a photograph of the first group of Cambodian students who went to study in Australia, went to study English in Hobart. I wonder why. And this was taken outside the old Foreign Ministry building, which is now one of the Buddhist universities. And we travelled by bus down to Ho Chi Minh, and on the way we stopped for lunch. So this is having lunch in a cafe. This is in April 1989. So I'm still in touch with quite a few of these people, and most of them have retired now. Okay. So now I've got another one of my funny stories. Well, I hope they're funny. This is a book that was written by a friend of a Quaker, a very dear friend of mine, about Quaker programs in Cambodia. And it was published in 92, I think. 92? No, maybe 95. So I was sent a copy. And at some stage, I lent to somebody. And I didn't know where it was. And in 1998, I was up in Siem Reap with a group of Cambodians who'd gone up to do some election monitoring. And we were out in Dum Dyke and we came back into town, and it was decided that since I was going to Phnom Penh, I would take some supplies, including those Chinese pork sausages, back to the family down here. So we were in a van, and instead of, the van driver was used to driving tourists. Remember, this is 98, not 93. So instead of stopping outside the butchers, he stopped outside the souvenirs. And at that time, I was working for the Asia Foundation. And whenever I saw a stall selling books, I would always go along and check and see if there were any stolen Asia Foundation books. So nothing on the first stall, nothing on the second stall. On the third stall, there was a copy of this book. And I thought, my goodness, where did that come from? And it was in a plastic bag, so I took it out and I opened it up and I read the dedication, and it said, "To dear Margaret." It was my book, and I had to pay $9 for it. But I was glad to have it back. So I don't know, maybe somebody left it in a hotel and the cleaner decided to make a little bit of pocket money. So we haven't got anywhere up to Untak yet, but I think both I and you have probably heard enough about this. But I'd like to give people a chance to ask questions. So thank you for being a very patient audience. How would you like to organise questions?
Are there any questions? Or
Comments? Did you manage to get the sausages?
did you manage to get the sausages in Siem?
Yes, we did. Somebody else is in charge of that, not me. Geraldine.
Three things.
Yes.
Which was your saddest moment?
Sorry?
Which was your saddest moment here, your happiest moment, and your most rewarding moment?
I didn't know that.
Your saddest moment,
Yes.
your happiest moment,
Oh, okay.
and your most rewarding moment.
Oh, goodness me. Those are difficult, Geraldine. I think my happiest moment is now with all of my I think my saddest moment will be getting on that plane next Wednesday. There are many things that have happened along the way. I've got some more jokes. if you bear with me. When I lived with the wonderful Khmer family near the National Assembly, we used to walk along the river very frequently in the evenings, and sometimes you would hear comments from people who were all Cambodians who were also walking. But I would be walking with the Cambodians. And one day I was walking with a very dear old Yay who was extremely thin, a brilliant mimic and a wonderful dancer. And somebody walking by said, I won't say it in Khmer, why is that foreigner walking with a beggar? Hadaway, Borate, Dachi, Moine, Songtien. That was really sad. And then another time, a much younger person heard me talking with maybe the same group of people in the same location. And they said, oh, Borate, Chetnit Ye Doik Manu, which means the foreigner speaks like a person. Oh, another funny story. We got used to having blackouts. This is back in the, I think this story happens in 1987. And you need to know that the water supply was very problematic, and there were breakages in the pipes, and using the French system, the sewerage and the water supply were parallel. So water was quite a problem. So the hotel very kindly provided drinking water, purified drinking water, in spirit bottles, in your refrigerator. Oh, somebody's heard this story before. Anyway, it's a great story, I think. So, I was staying in the room of another colleague who'd gone back to Australia. He said, oh, you can save the Quakers some money and you stay in my room while I'm away in Australia. So I woke up one morning and I had a very early meeting at the Foreign Ministry. And I went to the bathroom and there was no water because they hadn't turned the water on yet. So I thought, I'll go to the fridge, and I picked up the first bottle and started pouring it into one of those little silver bowls. Oh dear, it's gin, so I put that bottle back. So then I got the next bottle and poured it in, and without waiting, splashing it on my face, and it was vodka. So, any more questions? Yes?
Did Buddhism affect your Quaker religion at all? Having spent so many years in this country, has your faith been changed at all?
Has Buddhism had any influence on your Quaker changes at all?
Well, one time when I was visiting Mahagosananda, I used to go often with one of the old ladies in our household because she would take meals to Mahagosananda, and she would ask me to drive her. And so I got to know him very well. And I would go and wait while Ye prepared the food ready for him. And so this particular day I was looking at his books and talking to him about Buddhism and Quakerism. And he said to me, oh, the Quakers, they are very liberal. So I go to, with my friends, I go to visit the monks at the appropriate times, and I think we can all learn from each other.
if I may. Oh, look at this, right on time. Now, some of you are aware and have contributed to this little project that I've had going on in secret. This is a collection of stories, anecdotes, open letters. We're going to keep this open for a little while as to create a PDF version of this.
Wonderful photographs by the inimitable Steve Porte.
An email address, mydearfriendmargaret@gmail.com. If you would like to contribute, please send something into that address. And if you would like a copy of the PDF, let me know and we can distribute it that way. So it's an ongoing.
I've been very blessed with my family, who've all of them except my dear husband who doesn't fly. All of them have been here. My daughter was here for more than 20 years. My granddaughter lived here till she was 10. And Scott has been here for quite a few years. And all of the others have visited. So they begin to understand a bit about, well, Scott understands very well, about why I came and why I stay and why I will never forget for Cambodia.
I think it's time you to sit down now.
So, but seriously, I couldn't have done this without all of your lovely smiling faces and hearing you laugh, and I hope we can keep in touch. So very, very dear friends from a long time ago. Not many people who've been here all the time, but no, I better not pick out anyone, but there are some very special friends and you know who you are. Thank you, thank you, thank you.